Alright, today we're going to work on changing out the wheel bearings. I've got my jack stand and a jack and the necessary tools there. Protection for my knees, area I sit. This tool is pretty critical, as you'll see. So over here I've got my old bearings and new bearings. I've cleaned them all up. I'm going to need to pack them. Here's my new used wheel hub. I've already set the races in there with a tool, so those are all seated and ready to go. I will have to take off the rotor on the old one and replace it. So step one is going to be, I'll loosen up the wheel, I'll put the jack stand and the jack underneath, and then I'll begin testing for wheel play. Next step is I'll have to take off the caliper. Alright, so I got my caliper in place by the bungee cord. I try not to put too much stress on that brake line. And what we're going to try to do is make sure there's no play in this, either in or out, up or down. Let's get off this little grease hub. In doing that, I'll use my little hammer here. They show a special tool in the factory service manual. They also say this is one-time use. There is an O-ring under there. Try not to disturb that. O-ring right there. Again, try not to scratch that with your screwdriver. And they do recommend replacing the O-rings. So the next step, 13mm to get these guys off. Now the trick with these is, if you got an impact wrench, you're good to go. If you don't, what you're going to have is a problem like I got when I try to turn it. It's going to turn the whole rotor. So I use that nice tool we use to jack up the car. I'll put it in here between the lugs. Put it in there. And we're going to need to do this to get the rotor off too. These are only torqued down about 25 or 30 pounds. Alright, so drive flange is loosened. Next step is we'll have to get off this ring here. And for that I use this tool. That's done, and that will allow us to pull the drive flange off. What I'll do next, I'll remove the drive flange and I'll show you how easy it is to get this turned. Then my next step will be loosening up some of these spots on the springboard. Be able to get it loose. Sometimes it does require a little bit of prodding along, get a small screwdriver in there. And there's also an O-ring in this guy as well. Again, sometimes there we go. Comes fairly easily and sometimes not. And you can see I tighten the bearings up pretty decent. It doesn't have a whole lot of spin to it. Okay, next step is I'm going to have to loosen these. I can either loosen these on the ground, I could loosen it on the car. I'm going to give it a shot to loosen it here. Impact wrench would be great for this. I don't have that, so I'm back to my other method of trying to use this guy. This one is going up to 14mm to help loosen these guys up. I think I may have to move this to the other side here. Get more leverage. There we go. So it's just a matter of that. Now it depends on how much somebody has torqued this thing up before. I did torque all of these myself. So I know they're not going to be too hard to get loose. Alright, our next step is the lock washer. And this tool is what you want to have. It's maybe 10 or 12 bucks on Amazon. And it just fits right in there. This is going to be fairly easy. This will be hand tightened, so you'll be able to remove it real easy. Take that guy off. See how easy that kind of popped. Not bad, right? We got it. It's pretty heavy. So here's my disassembly area. My next step is going to be taking off the rotor, putting it on the new wheel hub, and torquing properly. I suppose if it's been there a while and it's an old rotor, You may have to hammer it a couple times to get it off, but this rotor's been replaced once before, and this is fairly new, so for me it just comes right off just like that. And here it is. I did sand a little bit down. It's in pretty good shape. I'm not too worried about it. Turn it around, line it up. So this one's a little rustier. Again, I sanded it down. Should be in pretty good shape. Now, make sure each of your bolts has a washer. That's going to be pretty important. Don't forget to reassemble with the washer. So it's pretty much that easy. The torquing spec for the rotor, you can get that out of the factory service manual. It tends to be 36 to 51 pounds. Alright, for the torquing, we have to play again with the long bar to help us in holding. Then I'll start from one of these bolts and torque it and move along. It's ideally going to be beneficial if you have an extension. It's going to be much easier. I can easily torque to 20 pounds, but after that it's going to get a little difficult. So this is what I'm going to do, is I'll keep torquing it and get it up to that 36 to 51 pounds of torque. So that's what I'm going to do next. Alright, we got the rotor installed. Now my next step is to work on packing the bearings, the new bearings. I've got several of them, but I'm going to use these Timken bearings. I will pack those in the packer. I'll show an example of that. There's another guy called Blue Hands who does a really good job at that. Better off watching that video, but I'll do a quick demonstration of it as well. So we're going to pack the rear side, or the inner side first. I'll put the seal on there, and then we'll go around to the front side and put some extra grease in there for everything, and then we'll reassemble. So this is the time where the extra paper towels help come into play. So I want to fill this guy with grease. I don't have too much because I've done this several times, but you'll definitely need a whole tub of bearing grease to help pack your 4 bearings or however many bearings you need. Put the bearing in there as such and just kind of go around and around, and you can see it's come up through the rollers. So we've got what we need. I'll do a couple more spins and we'll call it good. Gonna reuse some of this grease for the outside. Make sure it's well greased. Some people pack it in their hands. So my next step is, this is the seal, and I need to tap that into the bearing. Maybe I'll get a little bit of grease, fill it in here, fill it in on the other side. So I now got the seal seated pretty good, and what you can use is your hammer. You know, I tapped all around. I think it's pretty well there. Check it. Yeah, it's good. And then the bearing does move a little bit here, and that's, I guess, to be expected. I'll put a little bit of grease around in here. So I got my front bearing pretty much greased. I'm going to put some additional grease in here, and then I'll put some more grease as we finish up and check the spindle. So what I've done here is I've cleaned that spindle that the bearings sit on, and I put a thin layer of grease. It's fairly clean. Try not to knock off the front bearing. All right, we got it in there. And you may want to do this by hand initially. Let's see. It got on there pretty easy, so no problem there. So this is the tricky part. And this is where we follow the factory service manual and what it wants done. Is we've got to torque up this guy to around 70 pounds and then move our rotor left and right a few times, turn it around, make sure everything's kind of seated in there. I guess the grease is out. 56 to 72 is going to be quite a bit. That is about 60 foot-pounds, and I see it kind of broke loose there. It's really tight, but the goal is, let's seat those bearings in there. Let's get them solid so this thing doesn't move. Untorque it to 0 is what it's asking for. So that's 0. Then we spin it around a few times. Back the other way. So the next interesting thing is it's asking for somewhere around 13 inch-pounds, or about a foot-pound. I don't have a torque wrench to really tell me that. I can't get down to 1 pound. So I just kind of hand tighten. And we could loosen. You're going to need to check the play. I could feel a little bit of play with it at 0. So I just kind of hand tighten here and pretty much call that good. I spin it. It's asking you to spin it again. You know, check it. And then it wants you to tighten. Spin it again. And then I'll retighten one last time. You want to make sure there's no play. No play forward, no axle play. Tighten. Again, roughly 13 inch-pounds, or close to 1 foot-pound. Make sure there's play. This, I don't know how some people, I've seen some videos where they spin it and it spins a full circle. I don't know how they're doing that. This thing, these are brand new wheel bearings and they're all greased up, and there's no way you're gonna spin that one full rev. So it's pretty much good to go. Now, the next step is to get the lock washer on, and they want you to tighten it somewhere between 15 and 30 degrees. So probably tweak it just a little bit tighter here. And if I had a force meter, what I do is measure the force this way, tighten it up 15 to 30 degrees, put the lock washers or the lock washer on there with the screws, and then test the force again. And I want between 7 and 20 newtons. I don't have that force meter, so I'm just going to make sure from roughly the 0 foot-pounds that I have tweaked it enough, tight enough in order to meet that 15 to 30 degrees, and maybe notice a little bit more resistance. That's about all it wants. It just definitely doesn't want any play. And when I had some play, I heard a thumping sound. You'll have some kind of wobble in there. Must avoid that. That's critical. And again, there's a couple O-rings on here. One on the inside, and there's one on the outside here. You want to grease up just a little. I'll torque these guys up, my torque wrench, and I'll put on my cap. Don't forget the secure ring that goes there. Then I'll clean the brake rotor, and next step would be to put the caliper back on. So we got the flange bolts all torqued up, our little hub cap, or whatever you want to call this cap, on there. Everything greased. Still moves nice, clean. Last thing to do is I got to put on the brake pads, which are pretty new. These calipers you buy remanufactured, they go for 70 bucks. I think this one's still in pretty good shape, so I decided not to do that. So everything is good to go from that standpoint. Let the caliper come back down. Push on the pads and get the torque wrench, torque it down. It's about 25 pounds. Pretty much done here. Next step, put the wheel on, make sure there's no play, take a test drive, and... Alright, that's it. Again, just a few tools here. Impact wrench would make it a little bit easier, but you will need the torque wrench, a few sockets, 22mm socket for the back of the caliper. That could be the toughest thing to get off. If you can get that off, then you're probably going to go pretty quick in this job.